Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure tonight to speak on S211, Sickle Cell Awareness Day. Mr. Speaker, the United Nations, the African Union, and the World Health Organization have all recognized sickle cell disease as a public health priority. They also all recognize that June 19th each year as World Sickle Cell Awareness Day. Now, World Sickle Cell Awareness Day has been held on June 19th since 2008. That day, June 19th, was chosen to commemorate the day on which a resolution was officially adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. It recognizes sickle cell disease as a public health concern. Quite honestly, until last September, I had heard about sickle cell disease, but actually had no idea what it was or how serious it could be. I had the opportunity, though, to meet with members of the Sickle Cell Association of Canada, including my constituent in Saskatoon Grasswood, Mr. Craig Ealing. Craig has been a big help preparing me today for my remarks in the House. Some facts, then, about this disease. Sickle cell disease is the most common inherited blood-related disease. The World Health Organization, the WHO, estimates that up to 5% of the world's population are healthy carriers of the gene for sickle cell disease. It is most commonly found in people from the sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, the Mediterranean countries, and also parts of India. Now, people get one gene from each of their parents. A person with one gene for sickle cell disease is known as a carrier, and also known as sickle cell trait. They live normal lives, Mr. Speaker, and are very rarely affected by their single gene. But here's where it comes complicated. A person with two genes actually has sickle cell disease, also known as sickle cell anemia, and their lives have greatly impacted by this condition. Sickle cell disease results in the production of abnormal blood cells, and they are shaped like a crescent moon, or the letter C. Now, the normal red blood cells look like a donut without the hole. Sickle cell blood cells like to get stuck because of the points on either end of this crescent moon shape, which causes many of the issues that's actually associated with this disease. Now, the most common place that they get stuck is in the organ that cleans the blood. That, of course, is the spleen. Because they get stuck in the spleen, it withers away by the time the child with sickle cell disease is about 5 years old. Although a person can live without their spleen, they are more at risk of certain types of blood-borne bacterial infections. So as soon as a child is diagnosed with this sickle cell disease, and some as early as birth, they are actually put on daily antibiotics to prevent an infection. And once at an appropriate age, they will receive extra immunizations. This also means that the presence of a fever in a person with sickle cell disease could indicate a bacterial infection, and such situations are considered a medical emergency. Actually requires prompt treatment with antibiotics and perhaps sometimes even hospitalization. A normal red blood cell lives in the body for about 120 days, while sickle cells live about 10 to 20 days. So the body is constantly destroying the sickle cells and working to produce these fresh red blood cells. This can lead to chronic anemia, where the blood is unable to carry enough oxygen to all parts of the body. Now, the common effects of chronic anemia are ongoing tiredness, you'll have pale skin, weakness, and even a delayed growth in the development of some of our children. This crisis occurs when enough crescent moon-shaped sickle cells jam up in the blood vessel. It causes a disruption of normal blood flow. The body tissues downstream of the blockage lose their oxygen, and then they begin to die, which causes, in some cases, severe pain. If not promptly treated, the loss of oxygen can lead to permanent damage to affected areas. the most serious and really the most relatively common outcome of sickle cell disease is a stroke. This can occur in children, actually, as young as 2 years old. To prevent crisis, people with sickle cell disease must stay well hydrated, avoid rapid temperature changes. Children actually often can't play outside in winter, and they're asked also to avoid intensive exercise. They're asked to eat a balanced diet, stay well rested, and of course avoid smoking. They are required to take special medication, Mr. Speaker, every day to decrease the amount of sickle cells the bone marrow produces to avoid crisis. The only cure for sickle cell disease is a bone marrow transplant, which, by the way, does not occur very often because of a lack of an appropriate donor. Even though we have a bone marrow registry connected to worldwide donors, the best chances of an acceptable match would actually be the person's siblings.
I just want to interrupt the honourable member for a moment. I don't mean to throw him off, but there is quite a bit of talking going on, and I'm having a hard time hearing this very interesting speech. So I was hoping that everyone would kind of listen and hopefully take as much interest as I've got in it as well. So I'll let the honourable member continue. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Usually I've got this booming voice. Everybody listens, but I guess I'll tone it down for the rest of this speech. Some people with very severe sickle cell disease require frequent blood transfusions every 3 to 6 weeks. So this procedure uses a machine that separates and discards the patient's own red blood cells while transfusing the non-sickle donor blood into the person. Now, because they are receiving so much donor blood on a frequent schedule, they actually require the blood that is phenotypically similar to their own blood. This means a person with the African heritage requires blood donated from a person from the same heritage. Thus, finding an appropriate donor is often an issue here in Canada, although it is improving. Once a patient is started on the scheduled blood transfusions, Mr. Speaker, they also have to start medications to decrease the amount of iron that builds up in their body, which is a side effect of frequent transfusions. This treatment, as we all know, is very expensive. It often starts with a pump that releases the medication slowly into the person through a needle in their abdomen. Unfortunately, they are required to have a pump running sometimes from 8 to 24 hours a day. So one of the biggest challenges for managing sickle cell disease is when a person in crisis or with a fever sees a healthcare practitioner that is actually not familiar with this disease. Any delay in the treatment can be life-threatening, and unfortunately, it often is. I've learned that in Saskatchewan, we actually don't track the number of people with sickle cell trait, although in the last year, the pediatric hematology met with 14 new children in our province of Saskatchewan with carrier status. They now follow 17 children living in Saskatchewan and many in my riding of Saskatoon-Grasswood with a full sickle cell disease, a population, I might add, that has increased by 30% in my province in the last 9 months. So in Saskatchewan, sickle cell disease is primarily found in people who have immigrated to Canada or are first-generation Canadians. Many of the new Canadians are actually unaware of their sickle cell status until they arrive in this country, and they take their children to the hospital with a crisis. This ultimately leads to a diagnosis of sickle cell disease for the person in crisis and a diagnosis of sickle cell trait for the rest of the family. Even though the family is from a country with high levels of this sickle cell disease. Now, we have many volunteers in my city of Saskatoon. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they are arranging a blood drive targeting people from Africa, the Caribbean, even East Indian, Middle Eastern, and Mediterranean heritage, and that will take place this March. Next month, 2017, we will have a big Donate Blood awareness. The Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada is also planning to begin advocating for the expanded newborn screening in my province of Saskatchewan, which would include testing for sickle cell anemia. Now remember, the number of people with sickle cell trait increases in Canada. There is more risk, of course, of children being born with this sickle cell disease. Mr. Speaker, as I see it, there's actually three important things we can do to combat this disease. First and foremost, I think we all agree we can devote more resources to research and finding a cure. We can also raise awareness like we have tonight through S211. And lastly, we encourage all regular blood donations in our communities. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.